Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second History Day Insider Tips webinar. My name is Vania Boland, and I'm the State Coordinator for the National History Day in Iowa program. And this is a new webinar series that we're offering. This is our second webinar, but I'm going to also show the link where you can register for our upcoming webinars. We actually have one next week on Wednesday, December 12th, where we're going to talk about citing your resources and putting together the annotated bibliography. So make sure after this webinar, you go to our website and check out the next insider tips. Or if you have any questions for me and you can't submit through the webinar, feel free to shoot me an email, or that's my number right there on the screen. Just to touch base about Zoom here, on the right-hand side of your screen, you should see a table where you can actually submit questions. It's one of the gray lines there, one of the gray tabs. It's underneath polls, and you can actually submit questions that you have for me. So this is really informal. Throughout the webinar, if you have any questions, I'm going to be pausing and taking a peek, and I'm happy to answer any of those. All right, so tonight we are going to talk about how to write a History Day thesis. So we're going to go over what the thesis statement is. We're going to talk about 5 guidelines to help students structure a strong thesis statement. We're going to talk about when you're ready to write your thesis statement, how do you begin? And we're also going to focus on some project placement. So I've had some questions about, once my thesis statement is created, how do I add it into my project? And what location is it at, and what do judges have concerns with, and what looks best? So we're going to kind of go over a lot of different elements of the thesis statement, but feel free to submit any questions or stop me if you have any concerns. All right, so what is this thing called the thesis statement? So a National History Day thesis statement offers a concise summary of the main point or claim of your project. In other words, you're not just introducing your topic, you're creating an argument that expresses your topic's significance in history and demonstrates how the theme plays a central part. So what I like to say is make it short, sweet, and to the point. So with all projects, the thesis statement is one of the very first things that judges look for. So it's really important to not wait until the last minute to create your thesis statement, but we're going to talk about some different strategies to help make it a smoother process. It's best to start writing the thesis statement while you're in the middle of your research process. So some of you listening to the webinar may have already started your research, or maybe you just picked a topic, or maybe you've already started working on your thesis statement. That's perfectly fine. But I like to say at least have a couple resources on hand before you start writing. So you really need a good understanding of your topic, its connection to the theme, before you start trying to structure a thesis statement. And we'll go a little bit in depth here in a few minutes. But it's best to start in the middle of your research because the statement is based on knowledge, but it still has a chance to be flexible. So I'd recommend at least having 5 sources. This can be, 3 to 5 primary or secondary sources just to give you some background context and help you develop that analysis. It helps direct students through their argument, and later, during the contest or when the project is ready to be evaluated, it helps the judges and your teachers through the project's ultimate point. So it's kind of a roadmap through your project. And this is a very important part, but for a lot of students, it can be pretty daunting or overwhelming. So you want to make sure that we're starting this at the beginning and we're not waiting a couple days before contest. So let's get started and let's break down the 5 guidelines. So first I want to do a shout out to some of my veteran teachers, especially Kathy Paul and the National History Day in Minnesota program for sharing these guidelines and the structure with me. Thank you for teaching me on how to make a great thesis project or a great thesis statement. So I want to share these 5 guidelines with everyone listening to this webinar. The first guideline here, include all 5 W's. The thesis is the first thing the viewer reads. So we should know immediately who, what, where, when, and also the historical significance, or why. Why is this information important? Why is my topic important to learn about? I'm sure many teachers and students have heard me say why, or why should we care about what your topic did? But the big important thing for me is be able to share with your judges right off the bat why your topic is important to learn about. That's the big thing with History Day. We want to prove that significance and we want to share that impact. It goes beyond the facts. We don't need to see every detail of the topic in the thesis. So save those beautiful facts that you found for your student-composed words in your project. So it goes beyond those facts. The thesis statement is your argument, your claim. So in other words, the thesis statement should clearly share the point that you are trying to make. You're making that statement. You want the judge to quickly understand what your belief is, and here's how I'm going to defend it. Keep it short. The thesis statement should hover between 40 to 60 words. Too short and there's not enough information to explain the argument. Too long and too many details have been included. So we want to keep it short, sweet, and to the point. But I also want you to keep your category in mind. For example, if you're creating an exhibit, you only have around 500 student-composed words. So it doesn't make sense to use up 100 of your words just on the thesis statement. So you're going to hear me say many times during this webinar, have someone review your thesis statement. Even if you've just written one sentence, start chatting with people right at the beginning, with your teacher, with someone at home, or maybe another classmate. Include the theme words. So the theme words this year are triumph and tragedy. So judges need to know how the topic relates to the theme, especially if your topic is not as well known, it's extremely narrow, or just isn't immediately clear in the connection to the theme words. So we really want to see those theme words in your thesis statement. Write, revise, research, and revise. So students should not use the first draft of their thesis statement, but should instead revise based on feedback. Go over their research or conduct new research to make sure the thesis statement is accurate, and then revise once more. So just keep in mind, just like when you're building your project, you're not going to be using your very first draft. You're probably going to be writing 10 to 20 different thesis statements over the time of your research. This is something that continues to build, it continues to be strengthened. So what I would suggest is having your thesis statement on a Google Doc that maybe you share with your group or with your teacher, and just each time you're updating it, each time you find a new resource and you want to add a piece to it, or maybe you wake up one day and you think that would be a great verb to use in my thesis statement, jump on there and add it in. Just constantly keep building on it. All right, so now I'm going to go through a couple examples. So we've talked about the guidelines, we talked a little bit about the structure. Now I kind of want you to see some examples and pinpoint where some of the weaknesses are. So I'm going to pull up a couple weak thesis examples, and we're going to go over and kind of pick apart what's wrong with them. So the first one here. In 1865, the United States of America won the American Civil War against the Confederate States of America. Well, first thing, it's very specific. So yes, this information is true, but we're missing a couple of things here. So it's a really narrow topic, or it needs to be a more narrow topic. The Civil War is a very broad topic. So this is really with any National History Day project, students need to be addressing a more specific and narrow topic. The Civil War is a great place to start, but we need to narrow down onto something more significant. So why is it important the United States won the Civil War, or the Northern states won the Civil War? This is a pretty broad topic, but what is the student's focus? What's your argument? What's your claim? What were you exactly researching about? Where's your focus? So this statement does not clearly explain to me what the student's beliefs were to the historical significance. I want to hear that why. Why is this important information for me to learn about? And those beautiful theme words. I don't see any triumph or tragedy in this statement. So I'm concerned as to how this fits in with the theme. So if I'm a judge taking a look at this, I've got a lot of concerns and I got a lot of questions. Our next example here, so the second one. In 1865, the United States of America won the American Civil War against the Confederate States of America, making it the most important war in American history. Again, we want a more narrow topic. This is a little bit too broad for me. I want to narrow down and see if there's a more specific subject that you're focusing on. What happened during the Civil War that they won? I want you to focus on something a little bit more specific. And significance. Why is this important that the United States of America won this American Civil War? The student's argument is instead more of a personal opinion, and you want to stay away from personal opinions. We want to make sure that what we're sharing as our argument or our claim that we can prove with our research. How can you prove that it's the most important war in American history? Well, you really can't. I mean, you can talk about more of a specific to how one of the battles within the American Civil War was one of the most important or influential battles in the war itself, but you need to be able to prove or support your claim. I'm also not seeing any theme words in this section, so I don't have any idea how your topic fits in with the theme of triumph and tragedy in history. All right, so our last week thesis here we're going to take a look at. The Battle of Gettysburg was a major turning point of the Civil War and helped the Union Army win the war between the states in 1865. All right, so we have a more narrow specific subject. So we know that they're focusing on the Civil War, but they're going to zone in on that Gettysburg battle. That's great. So the claim needs to be, we're looking for significance here. The student's argument is instead still a little bit of a personal opinion, but I want to see a little bit more of a connection to the theme here. And I don't see how they're going to defend that claim. I want a little peek into what your claim is and how is this impactful? Why is this something that I need to learn about? All right, so we have a strong example here. So the student was able to take those 3 different drafts and formulate a new thesis statement, something that's a little bit stronger that they're able to present with. The Battle of Gettysburg in 1863 was a major triumph for the Union Army during the American Civil War. It turned the tide of the war from the South to the North, pushing back General Lee's army that would never fight again on Northern soil and brought confidence to the Union Army. So overall, this is pretty strong. The student went through many, many drafts on this, but now we have a narrower topic. The student is focusing on the Battle of Gettysburg and how it turned the tide of the war and how it was a triumph for the North. So we're hearing some of those theme words. The student points out its impact, stating that it turned the tide of the war from the South to the North. And they're sharing that significance, stating that General Lee's army would never again fight on Northern soil, how it brought success or triumph to the Union Army. I also just want to pinpoint a quick note here. If you have not been able to watch the webinar on the 2019 theme of triumph and tragedy in history, feel free to do that. The recorded version is on the National History Day website. So if you're having some concerns about how your topic fits in with the theme, we break the theme down and we talk a little bit more about how to make that connection. So if you're having some concerns when you're writing out your thesis, that might be a clue that you need to find a stronger tie to the theme. So take a look at that too. All right, so let's dig in and try and talk about writing our thesis statement, some things we need to think about. So first, do not let the thesis statement intimidate you. Writing a thesis statement is a great skill to have, and to be honest, I'm always very impressed at the quality of work I see at National History Day contest. You know, I'm currently in grad school and I'm still working on how to write a powerful and incredible thesis statement for my paper. So this is something that you will continue to use the rest of your education, just being able to write short paragraphs to describe a larger project is a skill that you will learn as you get older. So I'm so impressed that I have 6th through 12th grade kids that are taking the skill on. So you're already a big star in my book just for taking on this task here. But I want to pinpoint to starting at the right point in your History Day process is what's really going to make you successful in writing a strong thesis statement. So we have the 3 levels of a History Day process. We have our research level, the analysis, and the presentation. So right there in that sweet middle of the analysis, when you have the majority of your research done, and I know earlier I said around 5 sources, but when you're starting to attack that thesis statement, when you're ready to really pull together your 2nd or 3rd draft, you want to have a good idea of what your analysis is. What's your argument? What's your project really about? How can you sell it? How are you going to educate your judge? When you've got a strong analysis, that's when you want to start writing a harder thesis statement. That's when you're really wanting to get through the editing process. So start using those primary and secondary sources to make those connections. You're going to go through several drafts before you get it right. And I know that I've said that multiple times and I can't say it enough. You're going to want to partner with your History Day teacher or somebody at home, someone in the classroom. You want someone to take a look at that thesis statement and make sure that it connects with the rest of your project. I've seen it many times where students will start working on a thesis statement at the beginning of the research process. They start building an analysis and then they start to go build their project and they realize my thesis statement does not connect with what I'm talking about. So you want to make sure that everything matches, that you're not contradicting yourself, that it's clean, it's clear, and it's to the point. So a part of not only writing your thesis statement, but researching in general that I want kids to continue thinking about, you're going to have to make some tough decisions when it comes to pulling all this information together when you're developing that argument. You're going to have to figure out what information is interesting, a fun trivia fact, and what information is important for me to have in my project. And this can happen really with any topic. I think a lot of times we start researching, and as historians and people who love history, we get very excited about all this information, but you got to take a look at your student composed word limits. And you got to make sure that the information you're putting into your project, not just in your thesis statement, is very clear, direct, it's important, it needs to be there, it helps support your claim. Is it a fun, interesting fact, or does it support my claim? That's what I want you to keep in mind through this whole process. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how we have our research, we're ready to start writing, how do we begin? So there is a worksheet that is going to be attached to the email that you'll receive after this workshop, or sorry, after this webinar. If you're listening to the recorded version, I can send that out by email, or we can have it on the website. I'm going to double check on that. But if you watch this and you want access to this worksheet, please email me. And my email is at the beginning of this PowerPoint. I'd be happy to email it to you. Our 2019 thesis development worksheet. I've taken some screenshots of it, but we're going to first look at the beginning portion. So, like the 5 W's we talked about earlier, the who, what, when, where, and why. So this worksheet I want you to start working on once you have a pretty good idea of your topic and you've got at least 5 sources. That's when you can start working on some of these. So the big thing I want you to focus on is this when and why. Every time I talk to kids about when you're meeting with judges, even the interview process, even History Day in general, of what's big concerns for me or some advice, I can't say enough with kids. You've got to be the pro, you've got to be the teacher about your historical context. You've got to put your judge in that time frame of when your event, when your topic took place. That historical context is that background information. So when we look at when did it happen? How long of time period? When was that time period? How long ago was it? So I tell judges when they're viewing projects, pretend like you don't know anything about the project. Let the student teach you. So kids, this is the opportunity you have to teach an adult about your project. So you really want to have a strong tie into that historical context and be able to discuss that background information. And why? Why did it happen? What caused it? So I always talk about the women's suffragette movement. When you're sharing about earning the right to vote, you've got to put the judges in that context of why was it so important to earn the vote? Well, because that time period, women didn't have a voice. They didn't have the ability to share their opinions to the public. So it's very important to put the judge in that context of why is my topic important based on that historical background information. And we also talk about that short-term, long-term impacts. So that significance. Why is this important? There's a short-term. So what's happening? What's the impact right after my topic takes place? So right after women earn the vote, what's happening? What's happening in the community, in personal lives, in government? What's that short-term impact, that first shock? And that long-term impact, years later, how does this topic still affect us? In 2018, how does that topic, how does women's suffragette movement, that right to vote, how does that affect us? All right, the second portion of this worksheet, the theme connection, another big part of your thesis statement. I want you to determine if you're using both of the T's. And like I mentioned, there is a recorded version of the Triumph and Tragedy webinar on the National History Day website under the Workshops and Assistance page, and I will be sharing that link here in a couple slides. So if you're having concerns about how to use Triumph and Tragedy, if you're not sure if your topic makes a connection, please take a peek at that webinar. And I've also mentioned students are not required to use both T's this year, but I do recommend finding topics that are able to make a connection to both. So as you're filling out this worksheet, have a pretty clear idea of how your topic fits in with the theme. Since this is 20% of your project overall at contest, this is a pretty important section. Projects at the district level, if it does not have a connection to Triumph and Tragedy, it most likely will not move forward. So make sure that you have a strong connection. I also want to touch that a lot of topics, if students are selecting one T, so if you're going with Triumph, keep in mind that there might be a strong connection to tragedy. A lot of these topics are kind of going to flow one T into another. So this is a good worksheet to take a step back and see if your topic does connect to both T's. All right, and that third part of the worksheet, pulling it all together in a thesis statement. So it can be pretty rough that you're just adding all those sentences together, or maybe you need to do some editing and some switching around, putting that thesis statement together. But the big part I want you to think about here is how will you defend your argument? Have you found a focus? It's not just a fact-finding mission. With History Day, we are showing that significance and that impact, and we need to prove it. Do you have the information to prove it? Do you have the research to back up your claim? And once again, this thesis statement may change multiple different times as you're doing your research, and that's perfectly okay. That's why I recommend always writing in pencil or putting it on a Google Doc so you can edit as you go. A couple tips that I heard from veteran teachers and from alumni students and just for myself. Be sure to use strong verbs. Judges really do look for those strong verbs to get that message across. Avoid starting your thesis statement with this, I, or my topic. I think this is just a personal preference, but I've also taken a peek at our thesis statements from a state level and national level, and none of those thesis statements start with this, I, or my topic. So just a little piece of advice there. I personally like to look at the definition of all theme words. It kind of just gives me a better idea of other synonyms that you can use in your thesis statement or in your project across the board. It also helps create a very clear, direct messaging to what those words mean. When you're writing your thesis statement, see if you can use a couple of those synonyms, or just when you're looking at your research and writing your student composed section, see if you can use some of those additional words. Compare your thesis statement to your analysis, to your research. We do talk to judges about how students are not supposed to contradict themselves, so judges do look out for that. When you're writing that analysis, take a peek at your thesis statement. Does this match? Is this actually supporting my argument? Or is this just an interesting fact? And I just want to pause here. Does anyone have any questions for me? Feel free at any point to submit questions there. I am just kind of taking a peek, but if you don't, that's perfectly fine. You're more than welcome to send me an email or give me a call anytime. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how we put it into our project. So we've been working for months on our thesis statement and our research, and we are ready to build that project. But now we're not sure where we actually put the thesis statement on the project. I've had judges share concerns with me about this in the past. I'll be frank with you. Sometimes they approach a project and it's the first thing they look for and they're not able to find it. And sometimes that's a big concern for them, because we preach that the thesis statement is going to give you the quickest information. So just keep in mind the thesis statement is one of those explosive pieces that you need right up front. And of course, I found a beautiful exhibit board from past years that was literally attached to dynamite, and I loved that. She was very clever in that. So the exhibit category. I've got two different examples here. A traditional triad board, and then I've got one that rotates. So what I want you to keep in mind here for the exhibit is the short amount of time you have with judges, around 10 to 15 minutes, and all the information they have to consume. We want to make sure that important information is seen immediately. So that thesis statement needs to be loud, clear, and they need to be able to find it, and I say 5 seconds. So as a former judge myself, this was the very first thing I looked for. On both of these exhibit boards, the thesis statement is going to be the very first thing I look at, because it's loud and clear and right there in my face. And I walk through that first slide with judges just like I do with kids. I teach them how to look, how to use the thesis statement, what the thesis statement's going to say. So a lot of judges know that if they are losing time and maybe they're going to have to take that process paper and annotated bibliography back to the judges room with them, they're going to look for that thesis statement to make sure that they see a connection to the theme, that they see your argument, and they're going to know how you're going to defend it. And if you want to see some more examples, visit the National History Day in Iowa website, and we've got national examples just from the past 2 years, so feel free to check those out too. Documentary and performance category, I put these two together because they're pretty similar. So for documentaries, the thesis statement is usually shared at the beginning or at the end of the video. It's typically at the end as the final conclusion, but you don't need to say it in the voiceover. So you don't need to say our thesis statement is. You can just go ahead and read it in your voiceover. You also don't need to type it up and show the writing of your thesis statement. It needs to be a voiceover. For performances, just like documentaries, I've heard the thesis statement at the beginning and at the end of a performance. I personally feel it's more powerful at the end of a performance, especially when characters are creating some kind of blocking or they're saying the thesis statement and the whole group together. So if you're not sure what blocking is, it's kind of like choreography. So let's say it's a group of 4 and they're all standing at the front of the stage. 3 students step back and there's 1 student in front and they're reading the first part of the thesis statement. And then maybe all 3 kids stand up together and they read the next part of the thesis statement. So blocking is like choreography. It's a way to present different characters at different times. But like I said, both for these categories, both categories, I prefer to hear that thesis statement very powerful at the end. And I think that's what resonates with judges too, is because that's kind of when they expect that conclusion. And the same with the performance, it is said aloud and it's memorized typically. So if anyone has any questions for me on these two categories, please share them. And I've had this question before too, but the thesis statement does not need to be in your process paper. That's something completely different. The thesis statement is just created for your documentary or for your performance. Website and paper categories. So the thesis statement on a website should be easy to find, and I've seen it in all different ways. I personally prefer seeing the thesis statement on the very first page, so the title page. Some students like to create a tab for the thesis statement and pair it with their historical significance and impact. That's totally fine, but I think it's more effective to have your thesis statement right at the beginning, right on your title page. So, think of it just like an exhibit board. It should be really easy to find once I open up that website. And this is just a personal preference from your state coordinator, but you can completely ignore me if you want. If you're thinking about doing a website and you're thinking about putting introduction music on it on your first page, I would recommend not putting music on your website, simply because as a former judge, I would usually turn my sound off so that I could focus on the words that you wrote. And I think if you're going to put your thesis statement right on that title page, it's probably not the greatest idea to add music. It can be a little confusing or a little distracting. But if you found something that's powerful and it matches exactly with your topic and you're really into it, this is your project, you take the lead on it. So papers. The thesis statement is right at the beginning of the paper. Since papers are not a visual presentation of the topic, the thesis will inform the judge what your topic is and will interpret the significance and impact that you will be discussing within your paper. So many of us have said it's like the roadmap for your paper, but in other words, that first paragraph is going to tell the reader what to expect from the rest of the paper. And just FYI for all categories, all projects, while a good thesis statement doesn't automatically ensure a good project, it certainly makes the project better. It really helps students find a focus, and it really is a roadmap or the heart of your project. It's something that you'll always go back to and say, does it match? Is my argument strong? Does my research support it? Do I make a connection to the theme? Does anyone have any questions about the thesis statement, about anything that we've talked about, or maybe implementing it into a project? Feel free to always give me a call or send me an email. All right, just a couple of things here. If you need additional assistance or you would like some additional help on your thesis statement, we do have two opportunities here. So we have brought back the National History Day in Iowa Mentor program. So if you want to sign up to have a former NHD student or now alumni be your mentor for the year, you're more than welcome to do that. So you can take this link right here, and it's just a Google form you fill out. And we ask you what you're specifically working on, what do you need help with, and we pair you up with an alumni. So teachers, if you're watching this and you think that'd be something great for your class, you can also register and say that you would like a mentor for your whole class. We can do that as well. And I want to also say thank you to Kathy Paul from Johnston, who is a former National History Day teacher. She's a veteran teacher, and she's still helping a little bit within the Johnston area, but I met with her to talk about the thesis statement. She helps create phenomenal thesis statements, and she said she'd be more than willing to help any student or teacher that needs assistance in writing a thesis statement. So we are all a team here in Iowa, and if you need any help or you would like to talk to someone or need some additional assistance, please do not hesitate to reach out. This is a great time to do so. So upcoming Insider Tips webinars. Make sure to sign up for the next webinars that we have here. You can visit the National History Day in Iowa Workshops and Assistance webpage right there. Our next webinar is actually next week, December 12th. We are going to talk about how to cite those sources and how to create a powerful annotated bibliography. So please attend that webinar and ask all the questions possible. We want to be helpful to you, and we are here to support you. And Ask the Mentor, we are going to be doing on January 9th. We're going to be talking about different categories. We're going to have mentors involved that can answer questions. So anyone can participate in any of these webinars. Teachers, students, parents, you name it. Come join and hang out and ask questions. January 31st, we're going to talk about competing at the district contest. So we'll go over how a district contest operates, interviewing with judges, any questions students or teachers have. April 8th for the state contest, and May 6th for the nationals. So just keep these on the radar for next time. And I just want to say thank you for joining tonight. We're so excited about this program, and we're just excited about 2019. Please, at any time, if you have questions about anything, please do not hesitate to call me or shoot me an email. I am here to support you. But thanks so much, everyone, and have a great night.